In a landmark ruling that's sending shockwaves through Nigerian academia, a high-ranking university dean has been sentenced to prison, and not for financial corruption, but for sexual predation against a student. Welcome to Africa Watch 360, calm, clear, and focused news you can trust. We look deeper so you understand better.
Now, those were the direct words of the judge. That kind of language really sets the tone for just how seriously the court viewed this case against Professor Cyril Ndifon. There was no holding back. So let's look at exactly what the final outcome was.
5 years. That's the final prison sentence for the suspended Dean of Law at the University of Calabar, and it's to be served without the option of a fine. This is really the definitive end to a legal battle that didn't start in a quiet courtroom, but out on the streets with student protests.
Okay, so to really get the full picture here, we need to break this down. We're going to start with the conviction itself. Then we'll trace the timeline, from those first student accusations all the way to the courtroom. After that, we'll step inside the trial to see the evidence from both sides before really digging into the judge's final reasoning. And to wrap it all up, we'll ask, what does this all mean for the future?
So the key date here is November 17, 2025. That's when the Federal High Court in Abuja handed down its final judgment. And this wasn't just another ruling. It was the conclusion to a case that really had the whole country watching and asking some very tough questions about power in our universities.
It's really important to know that there were actually two people on trial here. On one side, you had Professor Cyril Ndifon, who was ultimately found guilty on 2 counts of sexual harassment. But on the other, you had his lawyer at the time, Sunny Anyanwu. He was facing a totally different charge, attempting to pervert the course of justice. And in the end, the court acquitted him. We'll get into why a bit later.
So let's just lay out the core facts so we're all on the same page. The defendant, Professor Ndifon. The prosecutor, Nigeria's anti-corruption agency, the ICPC. The verdict, guilty on 2 counts. Now, the sentence was 2 years for the first count and 5 for the second. The judge ordered them to run concurrently, which basically just means he'll serve the longest sentence. So, a total of 5 years.
You know, this verdict didn't just happen overnight. It was really the final step in a long, very public journey that started with incredible courage shown by the university's own students. You could say their activism was the spark that lit this entire fire.
Let's just quickly walk through the timeline. It all kicked off in August 2023 with those student protests. By October, the ICPC had stepped in and filed official charges. Then, the prosecution presented its case, and by February 2024, they were done. The defense tried to get the whole thing thrown out, but in March, the court said no. Professor Ndifon had a case to answer, and that all led us to the final judgment in November 2025.
Okay, before we jump into the courtroom arguments, we need to understand a legal idea that was absolutely central to the judge's thinking: undue advantage. Think of it this way. Imagine a powerful market owner who holds the key to a young apprentice's entire future in that market. Any request that owner makes isn't a conversation between equals, right? It's backed by a huge power imbalance. That ability to control someone's future, that is undue advantage.
And that idea of a power imbalance takes us right into the heart of the legal battle. The whole verdict really came down to the evidence the prosecution brought and whether the defense's story held up against it. This is where it all got tested.
But here's where the story gets more interesting, because this wasn't just one person's word against another. The case really dug into digital evidence, arguments about legal procedure, and 2 completely different ways of looking at the very same text messages.
So the prosecution's case, which was led by the ICPC, was built on 2 main allegations. First, that Professor Ndifon asked for indecent photos from a diploma student who was identified as TKJ to protect her identity. And second, that he demanded sexual acts from her in exchange for getting her a spot in the university's law program. Their proof? Well, they had testimony from 4 witnesses, including the student herself, and, maybe most importantly, a forensic analysis of the WhatsApp chat between them.
Now, Professor Ndifon's defense team painted a totally different picture. Their first big argument was that those WhatsApp messages weren't harassment at all, but just conversations showing emotional feelings between 2 lovers. They also challenged the process, arguing that the ICPC seized the professor's phone illegally without a court order. And finally, they pointed out that the main witness, TKJ, wasn't part of the original group of complainants. And of course, the professor himself took the stand and denied everything.
So what about that second person on trial, the lawyer Sunny Anyanwu? Well, he was acquitted. The judge said that yes, he did call the witness, and he even called that move unprofessional. But, and this is the key part, the court found that this phone call happened about 4 months before the ICPC even launched its investigation. Because of that timing, the judge said he couldn't prove that the call was made with the intent to interfere with this specific case.
Here's the part most people miss. To really get why the professor was convicted, you have to look past the back and forth and listen to what the judge himself said. Justice Omotosho's findings tell us exactly why the prosecution won and the defense didn't.
The judge was incredibly clear. First, he found that Professor Ndifon had, in fact, abused his office. This goes right back to that idea of undue advantage. The judge said the victim was obviously under pressure because of Ndifon's powerful position as dean. Then, in a really devastating blow to the defense, the judge declared that the professor was not a witness of truth and that the court simply could not believe his testimony. That pretty much dismantled their entire argument.
And if there was any doubt about the court's intention, the judge made it plain in his final comments. He called the professor a disgrace to the community of learner persons and said the sentence was designed to serve as a deterrent to others like him. The message couldn't be clearer. This wasn't just about punishing one person. It was about sending a warning.
Okay, so let's zoom out. What does this one court case in Abuja really mean for the rest of Nigeria, especially for its universities? Because believe me, the impact of this verdict goes way beyond the courtroom doors.
You can really see the ripple effects when you look at who's affected. For students and activists, this is a huge win. The verdict validates their protests and might just empower more victims to come forward. For the University of Calabar itself, it's complicated. It's a loss because of the damage to its reputation, but it's also a big opportunity to push for real reform. And for Nigerian universities as a whole, this is a major gain. It sets a powerful legal precedent for holding people accountable.
So the main takeaway here is that this judgment is so much more than one professor's conviction. Many analysts are saying it marks a real turning point, a huge moment in the long, difficult fight for safety and accountability inside Nigeria's universities.
And that really brings up a bigger question for all of us, doesn't it? What's your honest take on the role that our institutions, whether it's a university, a company, or a government, should play in stopping people in charge from abusing their power?
Of course, this story is far from over. It's still evolving. There's a chance the defense will appeal the verdict, and now all eyes are on the University of Calabar to see what policy changes they'll make. The next update could change everything. We'll keep following this story. Stay subscribed for clearer, deeper analysis from Africa Watch 360. What is your own take on this matter? Share your opinion in the comments section. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more breakdown.